right, so let's go over this. Discovered the largest silver find in history in Nevada. What was the right answer?
That was Comstock.
Henry Comstock. Okay. We talk about pull factors of migration, things like the Homestead Act, things like the California Gold Rush of 1849. This is a major, major pull factor to Nevada. It also goes to explain, and you should probably know this, the boom and bust nature of towns in the West. You find something valuable, people rush in, a town is established. Once that resource is gone, bust. It's a ghost town. The tumbleweed is rolling across the street, and you hear and wah wah wah. That's all you hear, and it's gone. Okay, so it's interesting when you drive to the West. Even today, you can see sort of remnants of some of these towns. Okay, founder of the Industrial Workers of the World, Drew. Eugene Debs. Okay, do you guys know anything about Eugene Debs? Anything interesting? He what? Rich old guy. Okay. What do you know, Trace?
He was like he was talked about. He was very influential in the 20s because he was a socialist.
Yes.
One of the first adamant I'm a socialist.
Yeah, he was a founding member of the American Socialist Party. He went to jail, and he was accused of being a traitor because of his actions after World War One. He was accused of, criticizing the government, things like that. He went to jail. He ran for president in jail. Okay, and received a thousand votes. Okay, so he was pretty influential. He was seen as a radical, as a socialist. People accused him of being a communist, all those kind of things. So he was very influential in the 20s. Yes.
Do you know how people in prison now aren't allowed to vote? Was
Ma'am?
that the same thing back then?
I didn't hear you.
Do you know how people that are convicted felons or in prison right now, they're not allowed to vote?
Right.
Was that the same thing back then?
I believe so. Yeah, I don't know how you'd vote in
If
prison.
you can't vote, how would you run for president?
Well, you don't have to vote to be president.
I know, but think about it.
I'm thinking about it. I know what you're saying, but yeah, maybe that's something you can use as like a social justice warrior later, trying to get people in prison to vote. Okay, try it. Leader of the American Federation of Labor.
That was Gompers.
Gompers, okay? And it's very important that you understand the differences in the labor unions, not just their leaders, and dates don't matter as far as when they were founded, but it matters because, the industrial workers of the world, they're a very radical organization of labor leaders, and their nickname is I Won't Work because they're so demanding as far as their demands that they won't work. So they're going to be especially hard to deal with when we get to World War One, okay? The American Federation of Labor, very successful. In fact, it's the only labor union that's on this list that's still prominent today. Okay, we don't call it the AFL today; we call it the AFL-CIO, and it's a combination of two major labor organizations: the American Federation of Labor and the Congress of Industrial Organizations. Well, they combined because at one point they were both opposing factions. One said, "Let's only have skilled workers. Let's only focus on bread and butter issues," and they had strong leadership. That was the AFL, the American Federation of Labor. The Congress of Industrial Organizations was an industrial union, which includes unskilled workers too. So I think it was in the 1940s or 50s they combined to form the AFL-CIO. Okay, employers often hired replacement workers during a strike. Often they were immigrants. Scabs. So these are people who cross the picket lines, who say, I'll work for lower wages. They're very much hated by the workers who are currently on strike. Okay. List of workers who employers refuse to hire because of previous pro-union behavior. Blacklist. Okay. And what you'll see when we look at the battle between labor and an employee, you'll see strategies used by both. Okay. You'll see boycotts and strikes used by the workers. On the other side, you'll see employers who are using things like blacklist and lockouts and hiring scab workers and strike breakers and things like that. So you have this battle between the two groups. Okay. And if you think about it, if you're on a blacklist, let's say you're going to organize a union at this particular factory. First thing I do as an employer is I fire you. You're done. Then you're put on a list with anybody else who may be a troublemaker who wants better wages or safe working conditions. You're terrible. Get out of here. That's going to cost me more money. So what do I do with my list then? I share it with every other employee in the area. What's the only way you can get around the blacklist? A couple ways. Change your name or move to a town where they don't have the blacklist, hundreds of miles away. Okay. So that was a pretty effective tactic. Another tactic I think you guys read about is a lockout, where the employer would lock the doors until you agreed to come back and sign something like a yellow dog contract where you would never join a union. Okay. Let's see. Union that only hired skilled workers, bread and butter issues. The AFL. Okay. Again, a trade union is one with only skilled workers. The reason why the AFL was so successful is because They had workers that employers needed. Okay. Any of you guys in this room can be an unskilled worker digging a ditch. That's not a skill that I have to have. I can replace you in a second. But if you're an electrician or a plumber or a mason, that's a skilled position. And the other thing that the AFL did that the other labor unions didn't do is they had a focus. They didn't say, let's fix child labor and minorities and pay and working conditions, and let's have ownership in factories as far as worker ownership. They said, let's focus on two things: better wages, better working conditions. Let's focus on those two things. And that is a focus. And there's a few other things that cause the Knights of Labor to fail, but the AFL still very successful today. Okay. Rutherford Horrible B. Hayes sent federal troops in to break up this event, the first major national strike. Great Railroad Strike, also known as the Great Upheaval. Okay, so he sends in federal troops. Millions of dollars in property is destroyed. And what this does, and this is big, is it sets the precedent for how presidents will deal with labor unions. So until we get to the best president ever, presidents are supporting the businesses. And that goes back to what economic policy we already talked about. Laissez-faire. Okay, so it's laissez-faire, promoting businesses to sort of do what they want so that the economy grows. So this kind of sets a precedent, and it will be broken by the best president ever. Okay, led the Knights of Labor. Terrence Powderly. Okay. And you're thinking, wow, that's not one I've got right, Mr. Sherwin. The reason the Knights of Labor aren't that important is because they fail pretty easily. There's a lot of things that cause them to fail. We talked about a few of them. They are the first labor union, but because they don't focus and they're not organized, and the Haymarket riot, which we're about to talk about, that sort of ends the Knights of Labor immediately. Okay. Employers could only hire union workers. Close shop. Okay. Most beneficial act for unions. Not the Clayton Antitrust Act. That's gonna be impactful on monopolies. It's called the Wagner Act. Okay. Now, interestingly enough, that doesn't happen during this time period of the Gilded Age or even Progressive era. That doesn't happen until the Great Depression, and we're talking about that in my Enrich class now. And it's easy when history gives you a law that kind of tells you what it does. Like, for example, the Meat Inspection Act. Okay, what did that do? Made sure that meat was properly inspected before you ate it so you wouldn't die. Okay, now sometimes they give you one that's like, what was that again? The Wagner Act. Okay, and I like to think of it this way. No, wag your finger. What couldn't employers do to people who join unions? What'd you say? It gave them a right to strike, sure, and you couldn't be fired just for joining a union. Okay, prior to the Wagner Act in the 1930s, you could be fired just for claiming, hey, we should rise up here. We should join an organization. They could fire you on the spot, which is not fair. Okay, so the Wagner Act is probably the most powerful tool that we talked about as far as for pro unions. Okay, government supported workers in this event. Anthracite coal strike. Okay, this is Teddy Roosevelt, and he, for the first time, sides with workers. He supports something called arbitration, where if you have a dispute between an employer and employee, a third party comes in and says, okay, let's listen to both sides, come to agreement, and we'll agree. Okay, he doesn't use the military force to force workers back in action. He supports the workers, and that's why he is the best. Okay, one of many reasons why he's the best. Okay, Eugene Debs led this strike, another big strike to know. Pullman strike had to do with railroad cars, major infrastructure, obviously, in the United States. This event led to the end of the Knights of Labor. Haymarket riot. Okay, so we have a nationwide protest for 8-hour workday. We have an event where a worker is killed. We have sort of a protest the next day where someone throws a bomb, a bunch of people die. And this is just one of many events where the public sees, oh, if you join a union, if you're pro-union, you must be an anarchist, okay? You must be a radical. And so what ends up happening is the Knights of Labor just die out, okay? You're going to be given an extra assignment on Canvas about the Homestead strike, which I don't think was mentioned on this one, but it's one with Andrew Carnegie and his biggest steel company in Homestead, Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. So, and in that particular one, you have another event where the president sides with the business and violence happens. So you do have precedent set as far as presidents until Teddy Roosevelt jumps in. Okay, used to break up unions because of its wording. Sherman Antitrust Act. What was it supposed to break up?
It was supposed to break us around.
Trust, monopolies. Okay. But in fact, because of the way it was worded, it broke up unions. Okay. It won't be until really, I think it's 1914 until we get an actual law that will break up trust and monopolies. And that's called the Clayton Antitrust Act. Okay. Finally, workers have more power to enact change because they act as a large group. Collective bargaining. Okay? It just makes sense. Okay. If one of you had a gripe and you went to the office and said, "Hey, fix this," Mr. Middleton would just say, "See ya, get out of here, get out of my face." But if the entire junior class had a legit gripe and did it in a peaceful way, he'd probably be more inclined to listen to you, okay? Because he needs the junior class. He does. We need a junior class here at Magnet High School, okay? Just like if you're skilled workers, you're needed in a factory. So if you work together and work with the owner through collective bargaining, you can work out deals, okay? So very good.